Welcome to DUVAR-Özel. Today we have a special guest from Russia, Fyodor Lukyanov. Fyodor Lukyanov is one of the most important academicians in Russia. In addition to his academic ability, he is editor-in-chief of Russia Global Affairs and also a chair of the Presidium of Council of Foreign and Defense Policy, Moscow-based NGO, and research director of Vladai Discussion Club. In addition to this high job and business, he is also an academic. He make some academic research in Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs in National Research University Higher School of Economy, Moscow. Today we will with him and we will discuss the general Russian politics, foreign affairs, and Russia-Turkey relations. Fyodor, first of all, Dobre Pazhalavat Istanbul, and I will continue in English if you don't mind. First of all, there is hot topic in Turkey nowadays due to the Idlib issue, as it is rises conflict between Turkey and Russia also. So I want to start with this point. Do you think there will be war between Turkey and Syria for Idlib? And if it will, how Russia can manage the situation? Because Russia has important relations with both countries.
First of all, I don't believe that it will be war for Idlib. We see a high degree of militant rhetorics and preparations for something. But at the same time, it's not the first episode of quite a high tension around several Syrian territories, in particular Idlib.
Yes.
Of course, it's not a big sensation that passions are so high, because if we look objectively, Russian/Syrian interests and Turkish interests there are, to put it very mildly, not the same.
Yes.
And that will remain. I don't believe that Russia and Turkey, not to talk about Damascus and Ankara, will find, so to say, a harmonious view on the Syrian situation. But the whole development between Russia and Turkey since 2015, when Russian intervention into Syria was launched, demonstrated that sides are very much aware how indispensable they are as counterparts, not because interests coincide, not because there is an exceptional degree of trust or sympathies, but because neither side, I mean Russia and Turkey, and we can add Iran.
Yes.
Neither side can achieve what it wants in Syria without a workable relationship with other sides.
Yes.
And this is very much well understood by both Turkey and Russia, Turkish leadership and Russian leadership. That's why I trust that at the end of the day, they will find another solution how to at least freeze this situation for now, and then step by step move towards more long-term arrangement. Again, it's difficult because objectively completely different interests, but I still believe that both Putin and Erdogan appreciate that other part is, despite very strong and firm positions, is ready to take into account the other side's interest.
But Fyodor, I want to underline that yes, maybe Turkey and Russia has until now have cooperation on Syria, as we know the trial meeting between them with the join of Iran. But today, nowadays, when we mentioned President Erdogan give deadline to Assad, to Damascus government, and inside Syria, we saw that Assad's power, they step by step empower their situation at there. So if both countries, Russia and Turkey, said, okay, we freeze this conflict, will Damascus respect this one?
With all due respect to the government in Damascus, I think they are very much aware that survival and existence of this government is highly dependent on Russian support.
Yes.
That's why I believe that they might be quite unsatisfied with some arrangements reached between Russia and Turkey. But at the end of the day, Damascus has no power to counter that significantly.
Or resist, maybe.
There is, as I know, I'm not dealing with this issue on day-to-day basis, but as I know, there are quite complicated conversations between Moscow and Damascus as well.
Yes.
But of course, in this situation, Syrian government has no choice but to, how to say it, seriously take into account Russian position.
Yes, thank you. And I want to also mention the Syria again, but with different aspects. Until nowadays, we saw many times Russia intervene in some countries, such as Ukraine, Georgia, Tajikistan. But in the one aspect, it's generally in post-Soviet area and at this zone. So it is a little bit maybe understandable because of it is historical area of it is historical presence. However, different than before, now, in one point, Russia directly had intervened to Syria. And in other side, for corporations, and not just but with Syria, in last October, President Putin went to important countries, to U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. In the light of this two factors, I want to understand your opinion about Russia's presence in Middle East and its aim.
It's a long story. We don't have time to discuss all details, but to put it very simplistic. First of all, of course, Russian understanding, Russian perception of direct, immediate interests is about Eurasia. I wouldn't call it any more post-Soviet space because it's outdated. So it's no post-Soviet space more. It's broader. But certainly Russia perceives countries like Ukraine, Central Asia, to a certain extent Caucasus, less, I would say, Belarus, Moldova, and others, as vitally important for Russian security and Russian development.
Yes.
It does not mean that Russia, as some people argue in the United States, for example, has dreams to re-establish Soviet Union or Russian Empire.
It is not realistic, I think.
It's not realistic. It's not realistic. There are some strange people in Moscow arguing for that, but in general, of course, everybody understands that the time of empires is over.
Yes, and Putin think like this?
I think Putin is very much aware. He many times emphasized that Russia is not the Soviet Union, it will never be. But to have
sphere of influence?
It's not just sphere of influence. I think sphere of influence is a little bit old-fashioned notion. It's sphere of security, sphere of safety, sphere of territories from which turmoil cannot come to Russia. Which means that to a certain extent Russia wants to have a certain degree of control, but control is not a name per se. This is a way to guarantee that those countries will never be sources for some trouble for Russia.
Yes.
And in this regard, multi-vector policies, as all of them proclaim, is fine. What is not fine when countries like Georgia at a certain point or Ukraine now declare that they only have one strategic partner to be part of the West, and that's it. Coming to the Middle East is not considered in this way. It's not sphere of security of influence in the same sense as post-Soviet or Eurasian area. But there is an area which is, of course, connected to Eurasia. And when Russia started intervention in Syria, it had several motivations, no doubt about that. But the official one, struggle against terrorists, that was real. It was not the only reason, but it was a real reason. And still now, for example, in Idlib, one of problems is that quite a significant part of the radicals there are so Russian-speaking, the origin from post-Soviet
yes, Chechenian and other groups. Yes,
Central
I know.
Asians, Chechenian,
yes.
Russians, and so. And this is a significant problem, because if they, by chance, will come back to Russia or to neighboring countries, that might generate a significant trouble for security. But at the same time, of course, when Russia intervened in Syria, it was a way how to overcome quite a difficult situation which emerged after 2014 in relationship between Russia and the West.
Yes.
When the West tried to isolate Russia and tried to limit any discussion with Moscow to Minsk process, to Ukrainian issue.
Yes.
And that was a very clear intention on the American and European side. Let's talk about this. We will not discuss anything else before we deal with that and settle that. Syrian intervention made situation very much different, and suddenly Europeans and Americans discovered that Russia is not only about Ukraine. That's an important factor which should be taken into account, and with whom they had to communicate. Russian success in the Middle East, I mean the level of influence which Russia
especially
obtained.
the cooperation between the US ally and Russia.
Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia,
Qatar.
UAE, Qatar, whatever. That came as a surprise to many Russians.
Yes.
Frankly, I did not expect that when it happened. More than that, when intervention started, the prevailing view, prevailing mood in Russian expert community was quite murky.
Yeah.
Don't we repeat the disaster of Afghanistan or American failure in Iraq? And
it's like trauma, I think.
like trauma,
Russians.
and that was very legitimate concern,
yes.
actually, with the previous experience. But suddenly it turned out differently, and Russian policy was much more skillful than anybody expected. And yes, the most striking phenomenon, ability to speak and to cooperate with basically everybody, which is unique. So there is no other country which has equally working relationship with Iran and Saudi Arabia, or Israel and Iran, for example.
Yes.
And that is extremely useful for Russia in terms of global posturing. Russia is not aspiring or pretending on global leadership. It's not the case at all. But Russia is interested to be part of processes which are important for its own development. In this regard, without Syrian intervention, without Russian quite strong performance in that conflict, Russia could never expect such a successful oil deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Because Saudi Arabia did not care about Russian position until people in Riyadh understood suddenly that Russia is a factor.
Yes.
And in this regard, we can say that this policy is is quite pragmatic. Whether it was the initial aim, initial intention or not, I don't know. I guess not, because it was rather step-by-step development. But at the end of the day, we see it. Of course, it has costs, and now we see just how difficult it is. Each next step, the closer we are to the settlement of military settlement in Syria, the more complicated it turns. But there is, so far, Russia and Turkey demonstrated quite a high level of flexibility despite all very harsh statements.
Can we say the same thing for Russia? Can we wrote this step to solve Turkey S-400 as a success for Russia, because Turkey is a not NATO member and a candidate state for European Union and a historical ally of United States due to the NATO, and can we say that Russia succeed at this stage?
I think we should not overestimate the importance of this deal. No one in Russia, I can say it very clearly, no one in Russia expects Turkey to, for example, exit NATO,
yes,
or to completely shift the geopolitical commitment towards something else, Russia, Eurasia.
But I think that, as I agree with you, because I think Turkey is valuable for Russia, just not just as a Turkey, but a member of NATO and candidate of European Union. This country is valuable. If Turkey exit the NATO or cut up their relationship with the European Union or Western side, it will be ordinary country, I think, for Russia.
Yes and no. I think Turkey will never be ordinary country for Russia, because Turkey is certainly self-sufficient, and Turkish importance, whatever happens in the Middle East, will only grow. I'm absolutely sure. Within NATO, outside NATO, with the status of candidate to EU or not, and this is, by the way, this is just this new stage in international development. Countries regain importance per se.
Yeah.
Because until recently we believed that alliances matter much more.
Yes.
But now we see it's not only in Turkish case. Look at the development inside the European Union. That countries start to look how to emancipate themselves towards greater persecution of national interest. But coming back to this deal, I think for Russia, it's first and foremost is a business.
Yes.
It's a very important business, yes, because of membership in NATO, not because Russia wants Turkey to get out, but because this is a very important precedent.
Yes.
If one NATO country dares or decides to buy equipment for the potential enemy, maybe one beautiful day another one will do the same.
As we know, there is some discussion inside NATO, some members.
There is some discussion. Maybe you remember in 1990s it was a very big story about Greece, which wanted to buy not 400, 300.
Yes, 300.
And at the end of the day, Greece was barred from doing that. They managed some kind of deal with Cyprus, so it was finally landed to Cyprus.
Remember.
So at that time, NATO was strong enough to say to Greece, no, you don't do it. Turkey is more independent to say we do what we want. I don't believe that we can expect big, suddenly opening of the whole NATO market to Russian arms, but again, it's a sign of how much things are changing. For Turkey, it's another issue. It's not my domain. It's up to you to discuss. But I think for Turkey, it's an important demonstration of a certain degree of sovereignty of decision making, despite and against American pressure, despite the very serious contradictions from NATO side. But Turkey decided to demonstrate that this is a sovereign state anyway.
Yes, and Fyodor, my last question again about Turkey. And you maybe followed our political system change from parliamentary system to presidency system. We transformed there with referendum in 2017. During that time, some politicians mentioned Russia political system. And in addition to that, all time we mentioned President Erdogan and President Putin's dialogue instead of sometimes we heard, of course, foreign ministers' names as Sergei Lavrov, so famous one. I wonder that, do you think there is some similarities between two leaders? Their way of manage policy inside country or their foreign policy, their objective?
There are, of course, some similarities between those two leaders, starting from the background. I think we can see, looking at leaders with whom President Putin managed to develop very intimate relationships.
Yes.
He clearly identifies those who, like him, came from the very bottom of society. Not, so to say, traditional aristocracy, establishment, but those who came really struggled up. The example which I remember is, for example, is his very genuine friend Gerhard Schröder in Germany, and they shared the same. Schröder was not part of political establishment in Germany. He came from the very bottom of society.
But Angela Merkel, do you think she's?
Angela Merkel is less so. Angela Merkel is more traditional.
Yeah, politician.
She was not from the very down. Erdogan is closer to this idea. He really came from, like Putin himself, from, by the way, from not a capital, but de facto capital, Istanbul, Leningrad, and from environment which was absolutely not okay for skyrocketing. And so in this regard, I think they understand each other very well. Secondly, of course, they believe in strong leadership, and they believe in, how to say it, direct link between leader and people. It's not very much liberal democracy, because liberal democracy emphasizes institutions, and both for Putin and Erdogan, institutions are less important until a certain moment. Now, for example, in Russia, we see that Putin, when he started to consider some remote resignation, he starts to think about institutions, because he needs it to guarantee smooth transition. But in this regard, yes, they share same understanding how to do politics. At the same time, having said that, I don't think we need to equalize them, because it's very much different.
Of course, different conditions.
Kind of different countries, different nations, different kind of societies, different circumstances.
Different religion.
Different religion, and also different nature of the state, because Russian state is, for example, many people compare Russia and Kazakhstan now in the wake of transition, and it looks like countries are very, very similar, but it is not, because Kazakhstan is a clan-based traditional society. Russia is rather a corporate state, with certain similarities but very big differences as well. Turkey and Russia also, if we start to analyze how society is structured, is not the same. But what they clearly disregard and what they reject, and that is common for Putin, Erdogan, Netanyahu, Trump. They disregard all this political correctness and hypocrisy. It's very important for Putin. When he speaks to Europeans, he never can go down to the essence, because the European political culture is based on certain omissions. You don't name all things by their names.
Yes.
And it has some pluses, some minuses, but for Putin it's very difficult to negotiate when you don't hear equal response. With Erdogan, as I understand, when they speak to each other, they are very frank and rude.
Yes.
But this, like Putin and Netanyahu, for example.
Yeah.
And this is what makes political intercourse efficient from Putin's point of view. It does not mean they don't have contradictions. They have more.
Yeah, I guess so.
But if they clearly formulate your interest, our interest, how we can avoid collision or find the common ground, that's much more interesting. It does not eliminate objective contradictions. It does not mean that this model will work forever. It does mean, of course, that domestic circumstances are extremely important. It's more important for Erdogan than for Putin, but for Putin as well. So, but it's quite a complicated combination of different factors. At the end of the day, I think that the relationship between Russia and Turkey at this point should be a matter of very deep, even academic research, because this is, from my point of view, the prototype for many relationships which we will see in the future. Because what we get used to, this much more settled, alliance-based relationship, the legacy of second half of 20th century, it has gone.
Yes.
And we see, especially on the Turkish example, but not only, that countries start to look around and they don't want to be trapped into obligations which are, so to say, by default.
Yeah.
And for Russia, it's easy. Russia is not member of any binding alliances.
And not, I think, favorite to have ally. Instead of, they prefer to strategic partnership or...
even more, maybe not strategic, but rather tactical partnerships, ad hoc partnerships to address particular problems just now.
Yeah.
As long as problem exists, is a partnership. Afterwards, we will see.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Fyodor. It is really enlightening points, and as you mentioned, for me and for our audience. Today we discussed the Russia foreign policy, Russia-Turkey relations, and of course the similarities between President Putin and President Erdogan. I guess it is really a fruitful discussion. Thank you for watching us.